This is Don Harder.
And Ken Lee.
And we're here to recap the top 3 tweets that we found everyone was really excited about in the month of January 2012.
I think the common theme here is content, what format it takes, how to share it, and where to best find it. So the first article was called, "Is it time to finally ditch your paper business cards?" Which was actually posted to Mashable with how many clicks?
A little over 3,600.
And so this they actually talk a little bit about sharing your business card not through print, but through the mobile or handheld device. And they go through different applications. In fact, there's so many of them, they said that the problem is there's a lack of standards. But they go through things like the Bump app for the iPhone and Android, the Card Munch that LinkedIn is putting out, and some other applications. But I think we had a different twist or a different thinking about what this really means in terms of life sciences.
From an art point, I mean, me coming in as an art director, I of course love paper and that tangible object, and I think that something's being lost. This community, the old form of communicating, and you introduce yourself and you hand a business card over. There's kind of a little pageantry that I really like about that, and it also says something about you as a person and your brand. If you're a company, life science company, you can look at a business card almost and say, oh, this is a new and exciting fresh startup, or no, they're kind of an established, well-seasoned company. That's something you subconsciously get out of a business card. And if I just bump my iPhone with yours, I don't get that. It's not the same. And although the technology, I mean, it is, of course, there's no denying that it is much more convenient to have my contact information directly into your phone, and you can contact me right away. I mean, that's great, but there's something lost. I mean, and
it's interesting. This was in Mashable, and Mashable is, you've got some tech files who are reading Mashable, and just a section out of Mashable. You got to consider your audience. I mean, certainly we're talking about life sciences, but the audience here are some of the tech geeks. And it says here, if you're in the tech industry, the type of business card you use says something about you, or it used to say something about you. And then they go on to say, but perhaps that isn't the case now. Sometime down the road, handing out a paper card will have all the cachet of an @AOL.com address.
Ooh.
So, it's certainly in a field like technology, being associated with AOL is really old school. But in terms of the life sciences industry, you mentioned expression, and let me go back to that. When I was at an old agency, we used to have a very large business cards that were bigger than your back pocket, and people actually remembered us because of that. So it can be a branding tool. Oh yeah, you guys were the ones with the huge business cards. In life sciences, the other thing to remember is we get a lot of questions about print. Is that alive or dead? And certainly in the media, with staffs being cut, maybe it's seen as less important nowadays. But I don't think it is. In fact, if you look at the Wall Street Journal, New York Times, I think the ones that are still standing, they have more currency now. They have more value. So people who are reading your stories in print, they're going to pay more attention.
Well, and to that point, there was a study that was released this week. I believe that this is more on the B2C, but again, we definitely believe that the folks who are in B2B, they're using the same habits as they do at home. They still find a huge percent of people still feel that print is a highly credible source of information.
Yeah.
It's not as strong as it was, of course, but it's a pretty big number.
Right. I think actually in our PR 101 course, the professor said, if you want to get the attention of somebody, you write a handwritten letter, put an envelope with a stamp on it, and they'll open it. Did you have a story about your mom about that?
My mom was just so cute. She got one of those packets that look like the form that you get, like that you tear the sides off and they're perforated.
Right.
And she called me. She's like, "Oh, there's a very official letter in the mail," and it's unusual for me to get mail at her house, but I'm like, just open it, and she's reading it to me. I'm like, "Mom, it's junk mail." She's like, are you sure? And I'm like, yeah, it's junk mail. It was some solicitation for something. She's like, oh, they're really sneaky. I'm like, but it got you to open it.
It got you to open it.
Yeah, but that's wrong. That's my mom, though.
Right. So, I mean, as budgets and life sciences are being shifted over to digital, don't forget about print.
No.
And certainly don't forget about the business card. I don't think we're at the point yet where, as you said, we can just bump each other and start exchanging business cards. And there's currency or credibility in print in many other forms.
Yeah.
All right. So the next article, the second most tweeted, was 9 tips for integrating social media on your website with how many counts?
A little over 2,200 on this one.
That's right. This one actually was pretty basic, I think, in terms of good. It's good to go back to the basics and understand, is your website optimized for social sharing?
Yeah, and we're looking at, as we're looking at new clients that we're onboarding and we do a very robust competitive analysis of their websites, one of the things that we constantly look out for is whether your website is easy to share with others. And for example, if I'm reading something on the road, sometimes I want to send that article back to myself so I can share it with my colleagues. I might not have the time to do it at that point, but having those buttons readily available to not only share to all the social media sites, whether it be Facebook or LinkedIn, or it's even just an email button that makes it really easy for me to send an article to my colleague, that all of that is really no-brainer basic stuff. And what we're noticing is that a lot of people are doing that. As in the last year or so, there's a conscious effort to bring in some of those kind of basic practice.
Yeah, it was interesting because as I looked at, if you look at this page with me here, to me, one of the best quote-unquote social media buttons, you see this print button here. And actually, as we were preparing for this, some of these other articles didn't even have that print button. So we're messing around with Firefox, and you try to print page, it's blank, actually, sometimes. So one of the most important buttons you can have on there is print, because if it's important enough to you to print it out, you can then, we kind of talked about this before, you can then share it. I think our SVP in the office saw an article that everyone should read in Time magazine about epigenetics. And how did he share that? He didn't share it through email, certainly not through Twitter or anything like that. He printed it out and he put a copy on everyone's desk. Yeah. So don't forget the print button.
Yeah, and that, I actually use the print button in a different way. I do not use it to print to paper. But another way
PDF,
that
is that what you're?
No, well, yeah, actually, we're a Mac agency, so we have that PDF button.
Right.
But I do use it when I do send articles to people. Sometimes sending the link is great, but that I feel like if I'm going to help out my fellow colleague, I'm sending you a link, Ken.
Yeah.
And what I do is I use the print button, which strips out all the ads and strips out all the extra stuff. I do a copy and paste into my email program, which recognizes all of the bolding and the underlining and the linking. And when I send it to you, you get a complete article that I know you can read on the train on the way home, which is kind of a nice little thing. So, the print button doesn't always necessarily mean print it to paper. You can use that reformatted, that nice reformatting that it does, and it'll simplify sharing articles.
There's so many tips.
That's a little trick, yeah.
I love that tip. I mean, we were talking about some other tips with Google. We should have a conversation about that. And the other thing that was interesting was number 5, use analytics, which to me, that, the 9 tips is one of the most important. Once you set your business goals and you're starting to create your plan, don't forget about tying your goals back to metrics. And number 8, stay knowledgeable. And why do those things work together? It's hard to stay knowledgeable about all the tools that are out there, kind of like the tricks that you were saying. We should have a conversation on all the analytical tools that are out there, and I think that'd be worthwhile. In this case, actually using in public relations, recent examples, just looking at Business Wire, which we use for our clients as a wire service to be able to promote press releases out to the internet, as well as go straight to the media. Very simple interface with Business Wire. They actually have a great analytics package on the back end to determine how many places that press release has gone out to, how many page views, how many people have seen it, and how many people have shared it. So I think people need to take advantage of metrics, and we actually noticed that one of their Arcadia, one of the press releases that they had 12,000 page views, and the industry average in the life sciences is around 1,000 to 1,500. So this was 10 times that amount, and we noticed you could break it down by where they're coming from. They happen to be French, then English, then German, in providing this information to our clients. So metrics are out there. Certainly, we want to stay knowledgeable about them, and I think we should have a conversation about that at some point.
Oh, yeah.
Any other Chemversation here?
No, other than it helps you kind of understand your audience. And it's, again, social media is not about putting stuff out there. It's about having a conversation. Mm-hmm. So knowing what people are interested in, for example, what we're doing with this podcast, we notice that people are interested in this. Let's have a chat about it. Mm-hmm. It's the same thing. When you notice somebody's really excited about it, or you look at it from a geographic point of view, you're like, wow, I didn't know I had such an audience. Maybe I should ramp up there. Maybe I can do something a little bit more geolocal. And that kind of insight is invaluable, and that's, I think, the beauty of the other thing that social media can bring. It's not, and it's having that one-on-one conversation with people.
Absolutely, and a measurable conversation at that. So the third, and probably the most quirky of the articles we're going to look at, this is the world's longest lab experiment, still going strong via webcam, and it actually had 507 likes. This one probably needs a little bit of setup. There was a physics professor in the early 1920s who wanted to test whether tar would melt as a liquid. So he basically set up this tar, cooled it down, and then basically started watching to see if it would drip. and it did. Not that day, not that month. In fact, 8 birthdays had to pass before he saw the first drip of that tar. And then what happened? Well, with 1 drip every 8 years, he actually had died. The experiment was put in the closet. And then another scientist, and this is from the University of Queensland in Australia, convinced the faculty to kind of resurrect this experiment, and he put it on a webcam. So, what does this tell us? One, it tells us don't ever throw anything away.
Hoard everything.
and basically, I think all life science companies have content in their closet. What I mean by that is just by existing, by breathing as a company, whether you're in life sciences or not, you're making content. It could be marketing content like tchotchkes. I mean, there's some fun tchotchkes out there. What can you do with that? Maybe you could do video with that. Maybe you could show pictures of those things. But more often the case, we're talking about tech notes, because scientists like communicating to other scientists. Scientific notes, white papers. What can we do from a marketing sense to actually package that for your audiences, or repackage that so that that's something that's fit for them, and to do that.
Yeah, and what's also interesting to add on to what you're saying is we found this on Engadget of all places, which a lot like Mashable is kind of it's a very broad audience. These are kind of geeks that really enjoy technology. So to me, it looks like this is kind of a strange place to see this, but
yes,
it is also a very interesting. It's a very interesting example of finding content that has broad appeal, and just it just adds some it adds to the conversation. Like what we're saying before, Twitter and social media is all about having a conversation with other people. This is a great conversation starter. Hey, did you see that thing that we posted on through a web? I mean, right. It's not hurting anybody. This is really easy to pull off, and it doesn't have to take the form of this, as Ken mentioned. There's so many different ways that you can resurrect some old experiment. You can find some old data that somebody's going to find interesting.
That said,
yes,
and the important message here is that we can find content, and we can do something with the content, and that's our job as marketers, to be able to do that on your behalf, is to have a strategy.
Of course.
In this case, what we typically do is in public relations especially, is we have a platform, especially with the election year coming. You can see the different platforms of the different politicians, what they're looking for and who they're striving to be. And so define yourself. What is your platform? What is the issues that you care about? And those issues should tie back to your business objectives. And those objectives, as we just mentioned before, should be measurable. Maybe one theme out of all this is for scientists is just to communicate. There was a great Lab Manager article in November of last year, 2011, and it said scientists aren't really trained to communicate, hence they're not great communicators. They can communicate to other scientists, but when it comes to the public, it's not something that they do and do particularly well. But when they do communicate, there's a measurable impact on their funding as well as on citations to their articles. So there's a lot of importance, I think, attached to not only doing good science, but communicating that science.
Well, that about wraps it up for this month. Join Ken and I next month as we look at the top 3 tweets for the month of February. If there's anything on here that you see, please retweet it. If there's any comments you'd like to make, please tweet us directly at Chempetitive. And as always, we look forward to your comments. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.